in private and public educational systems. The educational needs of our globe are too great for religion and government to shy away from each other on the topic of education. In fact, we need that dialogue now more than ever. I know the importance of public and religious partnerships on education firsthand. I spent part of my childhood in an economically downtrodden area of the American South. A neighborhood called East Nashville in the state of Tennessee. My mother was a single parent at the time. And I attended a school named Tom Joy Elementary School, which serviced mostly at-risk children. Now, my school did not have tremendous resources. The desks were old, and we had no computers, and our teachers were well-meaning, but they were stretched far too thin. The faculty and staff did the absolute best they could for us. But in retrospect, it was clear that the education I received at Tom Joy Elementary School paled in comparison to the wealthier children from across town. But what I did not get in school, I got just a short distance away. In an after-school program at a local church. The name of the church was Payne Chapel, named after Daniel Payne, a giant of the African American church who fought for freedom in the late 18th century. And it was at Payne Chapel after school that I learned history and astronomy and mathematics. It was also there that my values and conscience began to form. That I learned to love myself and those around me. Where my personal development left off at school, it was picked up at Payne Chapel. This is just one small example of the important role of religion in shaping lives of millions of children the world over. I believe that work should be applauded and further supported as we seek to mend the educational fabric of our globe. Not just for temporal purposes, but for lasting ones as well. For it was our beloved Holiness, Giovanni Paolo II, who said in his apostolic exhortation, Familiaris Consortium, the education of the moral conscience, which makes every human being capable of judging and of discerning the proper ways to achieve self-realization according to his or her original truth, thus becomes a pressing requirement that cannot be renounced. Engaging in this dialogue today will help us better understand the foundational importance of education and share that understanding for the betterment of our world's children. I look forward to that critical conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Father Tim Scully è professore di scienze politiche a Notre Dame e direttore dell'Istituto per
Father Timothy Scully, professor at the Notre Dame University in the United States, and known among his students as a very nice professor. He is very loved as a professor, and he has also been awarded numerous prizes given by the students that, as you know, are those that count more, actually. In the US, he is well known for the ACE program, ACE, which introduced in the educational, has introduced into education more than 1,000 professors that have been trained by him and by his university. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you. Molto grazie, my new friend Jose, and thank you, Josh, for your thoughtful and moving comments. And thank you all for inviting me here today to share with you something of our experience as Catholic educators in the United States. In particular, I'd like to share with you the story of what we consider to be a little miracle of the Holy Spirit, the Alliance for Catholic Education, or ACE for short. It's a growing set of people and programs, a community of dynamic, faith-filled, and committed educational leaders at the University of Notre Dame. We're working to revitalize the primary and secondary Catholic school system that has served for generations of poor immigrants, the people of the United States. And in sharing the story of ACE, I'll also need to share something of the story of Catholic schools in the United States, and perhaps a bit of my own experience as a priest and an educator. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to share this story with you, because Catholic schools and these little works of the Holy Spirit we call ACE has become a passion and a great source of joy and meaning in my life. And I might say curiously, siamo cuscino di comunione e liberazione. Siamo comunionistas. First, allow me to share just a few words about myself. As Jose said, I'm a professor of political science at Notre Dame in America's heartland. I teach and write in the area of comparative politics, most especially on political parties and democratic institution building in Latin America. That's my day job. But over the past 17 years, I've become increasingly involved and committed to serving the needs of Catholic elementary and secondary schools in the United States. You see, I'm the product of Catholic schools all my life, from primary school through my university education. I attribute my education by the Franciscan sisters and the Jesuits with planting the seed of my vocation to the priesthood. And my education at the University of Notre Dame to confirming this vocation and leading me to become a Holy Cross priest. In particular, Holy Cross's missionary zeal as educators in the faith is what attracted me to this community and continues to enliven my ministry in serving Catholic education. Before I share a bit of ACES stories, let me share some background about Catholic schools in the United States. As you may know, and as Josh alluded to, Catholic elementary and secondary schools in the United States is the largest private school system in the world. These schools provide remarkable, often transformative education to nearly 2.5 million of our children, including many low-income minority and disadvantaged children in America's largest urban cities, where state-run schools have consistently, frankly, failed to meet their needs. Over 50% of minority children in our largest urban centers in America will not graduate from high school. This is a scandal. Children who study in Catholic schools happily are 2 times more likely to graduate from high school and 2.5 times more likely to graduate from college. These are schools that work to serve the needs of our neediest children. They arose in large part in reaction to public schools, schools that were experienced by many American Catholics in the 19th and early 20th centuries as blatantly anti-Catholic. Despite being denied public financial support, largely because of this same anti-Catholicism, American Catholic schools flourished because of the bold vision of religious orders and sacrifices made by European and Italian Catholic immigrants to the United States. What these groups built was nothing short of a miracle, a system of schools that offer encouragement in the face of an often hostile culture, that offered the rich experience of community and faith and friendship, and at the same time, the opportunity for their children to participate more fully, both in American society and in the church. Unfortunately, now 40 years after their peak enrollment of over 5 million students, these Catholic elementary and secondary schools serve half as many students, even while the American Catholic population has soared and even while our public school system deteriorates. Nationally, we've closed nearly 200 urban Catholic schools last year alone, and 1,500 of those inner city schools over the last decade. This is a shame. The religious sisters and brothers that built and largely staffed these schools have dwindled in numbers. In 1950, 95% of the teachers and staff of Catholic schools were vowed religious. Today, that number is 95% lay. So there's been a nearly complete transformation of the human resources of these institutions, from religious to lay. In many ways, it's a miracle that Catholic schools have even survived this human transformation. Needless to say, there have been significant costs and losses. Among the greatest is that Catholic schools no longer have a labor subsidy of religious men and women who worked for little pay and brought years of religious formation to their work. Lay teachers need to be formed in the faith so as to be compelling witnesses for the children and families they serve in schools. Lay people also have families and need to be paid a just wage. The costs of education have been rising steadily, and now tuition faith-based Catholic schools are becoming increasingly difficult for poor and middle-income families to afford. It's increasingly difficult for poor and immigrant Catholics to have access to faith-based education that previous generations enjoyed. And here it's important to note that the United States alone is among the only advanced industrial democracy in the world that denies parents the freedom to choose publicly supported religious schools. And this in a country that was founded upon the idea of religious liberty. We believe that this is a fundamental injustice and a civil rights issue, and we are committed to changing the public policy of the United States so that the funding for schools follows the child, whether that child attends a state-run school, a Catholic school, a Jewish school, or an independent private school. So this is the context. Thank you. So this is the context of Catholic schools in the United States. They really are what our previous Secretary of Education called a national treasure in the United States. But it's one that's quickly disappearing. We believe that in another 10 or 20 years, if dramatic efforts are not undertaken, Catholic schools will have disappeared from most American inner cities and will only remain in small numbers and will only be accessible to wealthy families in elite private schools. This is the situation today. And it was already the reality confronting Catholic schools a couple of decades ago when the idea of ACE was born. I consulted a friend and my spiritual advisor, Sister Lourdes Sheehan, who was then Secretary of Education for the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. And I asked her what Notre Dame could do to support Catholic schools. Sister Lourdes responded that we could find ways to get the great leaders who were sitting in our classrooms as students at Notre Dame and across the country out of their desks and into the front of other classrooms as teachers, and to do so in America's neediest classrooms. Her challenge was compelling, and soon I engaged another friend. And together we decided to proceed. Sean Mcgraw, a great friend and recent graduate from Notre Dame, who had just finished his degree from the London School of Economics and is now a Holy Cross priest, we set out to explore where the Holy Spirit was leading us. First, we needed to know if our students would respond to this call to be Catholic school teachers in the inner cities. So we placed a full-page ad in our school newspaper, The Observer, which said in giant bold letters, "Tired of getting homework? Then give some. Be a teacher." The ad included details for an informational meeting. We had no clue how many people would show up, nor how we would train these teachers, since we had closed our School of Education in desperation for its mediocrity, nor where we would place them as teachers. We knew nothing. But we had to start somewhere, and we decided to start with the university students themselves, to see if there was a hunger for this sort of mission and work. the response was decisive and overwhelming. At that first informational meeting, 17 years ago, over 200 Notre Dame graduates filled the meeting room. And we knew immediately that we'd stumbled into something deeply felt. They were hungry. They were hungry for the experience of teaching. They were hungry for the experience of faith and community. But now the hard part, we had to create a program, one that responded to that hunger to serve, but also the real and pressing needs of our inner city Catholic schools and the disadvantaged students they serve. So, of course, we turned to the Holy Spirit, and improvising as we could, we built this program we call ACE. We realized that other teacher preparations program frankly provided little support to novice teachers, often leaving them feel isolated and fending for themselves during the difficult first years of teaching. Did you know that over 35% of first-year teachers in our country trained to be teachers leave the classroom after their first year? Over 35%. So we decided that we needed to support these young teachers. So we created a program with 3 pillars: developing young men and women for professional life as teachers who would live in the context of community and friendship, and who would grow in an eagerness to share and nourish their faith and spiritual lives. Though the earliest days of the program were filled with basically making it up as we went along, we were able to arrive upon a distinctive model of forming Catholic educators and dynamic young leaders engaged in the mission of revitalizing Catholic schools. So first and briefly, to prepare professional educators, we determined that we needed to offer a high-quality academic program that would effectively train young men and women to succeed in difficult classrooms. So over the last couple decades, we've developed and improved an innovative model of teacher education that includes 2 intensive summer sessions on Notre Dame's campus, where we have a practicum in local public and Catholic schools, intensive graduate coursework, and they're supported by field supervisors. And at the end of these 2 exhausting summers and classroom teachers, they receive a master's from Notre Dame. And now the miracle. 17 years later, of these 1,300 young people who've served in these schools, 75% of them are still in classrooms. For the community pillar, so that these new teachers would have the support they needed, we chose to place the teachers together in groups of 4 to 7 men and women, living together in 3 dozen Christian communities spread throughout America's inner cities. We invited them to an open model of Christian living based upon prayer and shared service. We believe that this approach, though it brought with it numerous challenges of its own because people bring different spiritualities, would provide the types of friendships, common experience and shared faith, and mutual support for these young people in the very challenging first days of teaching that would give them nourishment and strength. Simply put, ACE teachers minister to one another, sharing their faith, friendship, and experience as novice teachers. Most profoundly, we make community one of our 3 pillars because community is the primary context for becoming human. in our experience of meeting friends here in Rimini, this focus on community and friendship has been an immediate source of resonance and familiarity to a common understanding that we share of how to live Iglesia. For all of these reasons, ACERs tend to form lifelong friendships, and over a quarter of them marry one another. These deep human bonds have led us to think of ACE not as a service program, but a lifelong movement. Finally, at the heart of our experience as an ACE community, and as a program in service to Catholic school, is a third pillar, the most important, our faith in Jesus Christ, and his model is the good teacher. Fundamentally, we've come to see the experience that ACE teachers undergo a call to discipleship. The first thing we do with each new ACE class is to share with them the invitation to the first disciples in the Gospel of John, to come and see. As we've continued to speak about the spiritual identity of our community in ACE, we always do so in the language of the gospel, in terms of discipleship, and in terms of closely following the model of Christ the teacher. These images and sources have shaped the identity of our community and are manifested in a sequence of retreats, vibrant liturgies, and prayer services at key times throughout the two-year program. These ACERs have been overwhelmingly successful after they finish the ACE program. There's a strong sense of faith lived out in action through direct service to the underprivileged that motivates these teachers. All of them share a desire to give back the gifts they've received. Most view their service as teachers not as a job, but as a vocation. And because it's so hard to get into, we take 1 of 6 who apply. We're trying to cultivate the future leadership of the church and of our country. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, ACE is profoundly Eucharistic. At the heart of our prayer always is the Eucharist. ACE's spirituality places the Eucharist at the center of every day of our life. It's the summit and source of the life of the church. Every evening in the summer program, many of the participants and staff share in an intimate celebration of the Eucharist. Let me close by sharing where this journey has taken us most recently. We soon learned that the greatest challenge facing all schools, faith-based or not, is the leadership in the school building, the quality of the leadership in the school building. So we decided to form a second program, a national program of faith-based Christian school principals. Because to lead a private school is much more multifaceted a role than sometimes is to run a public school. You have to raise your own money, first of all, every penny of it. So we have several hundreds every year coming to us from across the United States to form change agents for public and private schools. We've created the leading not-for-profit consulting service for faith-based schools, ACE Consulting. We work with schools in a variety of areas ranging from faith-based identity to more effective management and financial practices. We've begun our own schools, but only in states that accept the reality that inner-city faith-based education cannot continue without the support of the state. So states like Florida, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Ohio, that have vouchers, that recognize the justice of public funding for Catholic schools and for faith-based schools, are those places where we seek to open schools. We've opened our first 3 this fall in Tucson, Arizona. We've also launched a new national campaign to double the Latino participation in Catholic schools throughout the United States. Because there is a Catholic school advantage for the most disadvantaged minority students, and we can prove that empirically. So how to increase the access to our most recent immigrant group? Because if we fail the Latino community in the United States in bringing them the fruits of being involved in American civil life, it will be the first time as a church in America that we've failed the needs of an immigrant community, and that would be a shame. So after 17 years, we're still just getting started. There's much more to be done to support Catholic schools in the United States and all faith-based initiatives. And we too look for partners, including with the Obama administration, to strengthen and sustain these national treasures. We look for opportunities to form relationships and share with groups like Comunidad y Liberación, with their strong links to education and your vibrant community of friends. You are what brings us life and renewed hope for the apostolate of Catholic education. So I look forward to continuing the conversations we've begun here and to find new opportunities to strengthen our friendships and the discipleship we share in Christ. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Finalmente abbiamo lasciato
Last but not least, Lucía Figar de Lacalle, Spanish from Madrid. Lucía worked at the government presidency, she worked at the European Parliament, and now she's responsible for education in the Madrid community. All the educational responsibilities have been transferred to the communities, so she's responsible for the whole of education. Thank you for coming, Lucía.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. Quería decir en primer lugar que estoy orgullosa.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm really pleased to be here and participate in the renowned this renowned gathering of women. It's a true privilege to be invited here by Communion and Liberation to participate in this panel discussion, and I'm really proud to be sitting at the same table with true protagonists in the field of education. Dear friends, I will be brief, not to steal away time from the debate. I'd like to start by saying that education in Spain faces major challenges. All international reports have highlighted this, especially the latest PISA report, where actually Spain is in the bottom lines of the OECD classification. There are many indicators which point to the fact that we are well below the European average for mathematics and sciences. We've got 30% school failure rates. We're very far from the objectives of the Council of Europe, which has set as a goal 15% failure rate by 2020. This very bad situation in Spain has an explanation, which is the ideas that have inspired education in Spain in the last years. There were many laws, all of which have responded to just one pattern of education, one vision. Universalization of education in Spain was an important and major conquest, but well after many other European countries. The educational rules and laws were supported by people who wanted to understand the reasons why inadequate proficiency is achieved at school. This reasoning was brought to an extreme in an attempt to achieve equality in order not to hit the student's personality. The authoritativeness of the teaching staff was questioned. Poor results were justified also by the fact that
intromisión excesiva del Estado en la educación,
by the fact that the teachers were not good enough. I'm sorry, there is a small technical problem.
Esta corriente de pensamiento que no ha sido.
Okay, the problem has been solved. This current of thinking was not only typical of Spain, it was corrected in other European countries. In Spain, instead, maybe this current of thinking has become even more marked in the latest years. We have an educational system which is unacceptable for our economy. It cannot be defended in our democracy. It is not sustainable for our economy because with 30% failure rates at school, 1/3 of young people have skills that cannot be used. And it's also unacceptable to our democracy because inequality has increased. The opportunities of social promotion have decreased because of this lack of education, and it's also non-acceptable to the families and the students. The parents no longer have the right to choose the proper educational model for their children. The regional governments, so we, are responsible for the implementation of educational policies. Certainly we cannot change the national laws. This is the Parliament's task. I wish there would be a change in the laws of the country to change the educational scenario I just described. However, we can do a lot within our responsibility at the level of regional government. And this is what the government of the Madrid community has done in the last years. It's not up to to us to change the national laws. However, we have the possibility of organizing education in a certain way and introduce major changes. Experiences which educating experiences. This is the title of the panel discussion. Let me highlight a few important aspects. First of all, let me stress the common thread in all the initiatives and reforms we have pursued. In other words, we have tried to increase the educational freedom in our region. First and foremost, we opted for a clear option, that is, improve the educational landscape in centers which are managed privately with public funding. Within the community of Madrid, these centers are supported by public funding from the regional government, but they are managed, they are run privately. We have increased the possibility of studying there. In the past, parents had to pay 100% of the expenses for their children to study in those centers. Now the situation is different. For the past 7 years, we have offered public spaces so that cooperatives and religious centers can promote their educational projects with the support of public funds. There's also a problem of locations, of venues. It was a big problem in Spain. We have provided these facilities free of charge to faith-based organizations, cooperatives, and others, so that they would create centers run privately but funded by the government. We've opened 79 new centers of this type in the last 7 years in the community of Madrid, and today we have more or less 52% public schools in our region, in the community of Madrid. The private schools account for 15%, and the rest is accounted for by privately run but state-funded schools. Within these, more than 2/3 provide Catholic education. Communion and Liberation runs 2 centers. In Spain, Communion and Liberation is called Comunión and Liberación. I hope these centers increase in number in the future. I hope they will not be limited to just 2. This policy of expanding schools of this type was motivated by the demands of families. I mean, it was not a decision made by the government. It was the families that demanded this, because there were many families from Madrid that had no possibility of sending their children to certain schools. So we wanted to meet these demands by providing more places at school in these facilities. Furthermore, for children up to the age of 3, we have created daycare centers. At the age of 3, we already have 100% of children going to daycare centers. For these children, we have vouchers, school vouchers, for two-thirds of the families, covering more or less 50% of the educational expenses in this age group from 0 to 3. And then 2 years ago, we introduced the possibility of deducting schooling expenses from the local income taxes. Of course, within the region, we have limited tax competencies. We cannot deduct 100%, of course, but we have started to do so. We are the only regional government that has done this in Spain. So a schooling voucher for the smallest children and the possibility of deducting schooling expenses from the local income taxes. We have therefore implemented the principle of choosing, of free choice by the families. It's a central principle to us. You don't need a national law to state this principle. We've also made it possible for the individual centers to grow, differentiate, have their own characteristics. Public centers and privately run state-funded centers are allowed to develop their own programs, their own curricula, for example, bilingual teaching. At the present time, 1/3 of all public schools in the Madrid community have teachers teaching both in Spanish and English. It's not English classes. It's the whole teaching which is done in English. We have opened these bilingual curricula also to privately run state-funded centers. They are funded by the regional government to teach both in English and Spanish. It's an extremely successful curriculum. There's great demand for these programs by the families. We will enlarge them in the future. Then we have introduced innovative programs dealing with new technologies and extension of the curricula. Similarly to the bilingual teaching solution. The important thing is that they can differentiate themselves, compete, and give the families the right to choose the proper educational model for their children. This, of course, makes them free to choose. And for the families to be free to choose, you have to provide them with multiple opportunities to choose from. We also wanted to strengthen the role of families in the field of education. We've also strengthened the role of school councils, as we call them. All these innovations were the result of voting processes, not only at the top or among the teaching staff, but we involved the families. These projects are hardly successful unless they meet the families' desires and demands. When we chose the centers for differentiated programs with differentiated curriculum, so privately run state-funded centers, we have always done so with the support of most of the involved families. By so doing, we have the absolute guarantee that what we're doing fulfills the family's needs. and will be actually implemented successfully because of the family's support. In Spain, we did really something new, that is disseminating major important information so that the families can choose the most appropriate educational model for their children. It is difficult. Maybe the freedom of choice only exists in theory, and then there have to be tools to implement all this. And in Madrid, we started out disseminating important information that the parents actually needed. We started with the proficiency at school in the different age groups, in the primary schools, in high schools. 5 years ago, this actually was criticized, but now the parents can compare the proficiency levels in different educational facilities so as to get important information for their decisions. I talked about the proficiency level, but then there's also direct access to these facilities and to what they're doing. We want all this information to be public. For example, the curricula, the sports activities, they must all be made public. The parents must have all this information in their hands in order to make the best possible decision, in order to choose in the best possible conditions. In reality, we at the regional government think that the freedom to choose is something you can't do without. We have explicitly reiterated this and also, in a way, improved the quality of teaching. Giving this freedom to choose, also the teaching quality improved. When you have freedom, autonomy, competence, when you free all the forces of creativity, then new projects develop and the quality improves globally. In the last 6 years, the failure rates have improved as compared to other Spanish regions. We're in line with the rest of Europe. I've got recent information. School starts again in September. We've got 86% of families from Madrid receiving or being allotted a schooling place at the center, at the facility that they chose. 1/3 of the public schools is bilingual, thanks to the funds allocated by the regional government. There's still a long way to go. However, I would like to really tell you what we have done at our regional government. We don't have the possibility of changing the laws. We don't have the weapons that the state has yet. This is a regional government which does things to improve the freedom of choice of parents, trying to also improve the quality of teaching. Just one final remark. It is actually worth noting how important the Catholic schools are in Madrid and Spain. Not all regions can provide information on the levels achieved. We have in Madrid 33% privately run state-funded schools. Concerning Catholic churches, Catholic schools, you can't understand education in Spain and Madrid without understanding the role of the Catholic schools, which first of all provide highly qualified services for the education of children and adolescents. Parents want this from the church. They want education in line with their convictions. And also the Catholic schools are facing major educational challenges in an optimal way. In the last 10-15 years in Spain, we have witnessed a major wave of migration. 17% of children in the Madrid schools are immigrants. All this has taken place within just a short period of time. The schools have accepted a lot of these children of immigrant parents, establishing an intercultural dialogue based on the gospel. Then educational centers with 100 years of tradition have adapted to the requirements of the 21st century, providing bilingual teaching or using new technologies or changing parts of their curricula. The Catholic Church set an example in meeting many of the parents' demands. And also the Catholic Church set an example in dealing with the drop in the number of religious staff and priests in schools. As a matter of fact, lay professors are taking up educational projects in the Catholic Church. The Church in Spain has actually done a lot in order to train lay teachers who take their task and identify themselves with the charism of the religious institutions. They are responsible for educational projects. Many nuns, many priests from the Catholic Church and from the Catholic schools have been involved in these new projects in the expansion phase. Many projects are in the hands of religious individuals and lay individuals, and many more children can now be taught the Catholic religion in our country. Again, thanks to Communion and Liberation and this gathering in Rimini.
Faccio due domande brevi.
Just two very quick questions to our panelists. The first question is intended for Joshua. Now, during your speech, you said that one of the things that is missing in all the faith activities is mentioning the school as one of those parts that could receive support from the government. It's as if they were saying, we want to support you on everything except school and education. And then I would like to, and here I would like to have your reply, I would like to ask all of you, and to understand why is it that currently the American government does not want to intervene on this initiative. So which one is the task of state and government with reference to education, in your opinion? Is it just to pass legislation and say how things should be done, or rather to support all different activities that stem from the social tissue, from the social fabric of a society?
It's certainly a robust debate now in the United States Congress and in the broader American public. There are some who say because of our...
Non c'è.
Start over? Okay. It's certainly a robust debate now in the United States Congress and in the broader American public. there are some who say because of our foundational, our constitutional notion of the separation of church and state, that we must be wary of funding religious schools. There are others who, as Father Scully so eloquently believe that dollars can follow students wherever they may go. I will say the President is deeply concerned about the very challenged state of public schools, as has been noted. But that concern is not to the exclusion of certain support for private institutions. And there's much more we can do in that regard. We will soon reauthorize a major education law in the United States. And while grand theoretical debates about church and state will certainly continue and will likely not be resolved, let's talk about how to get religious schools more funding for transportation, for after-school provision, for interventions to bring them within the communities in schools model to provide services within schools. This is not ideal, and I understand that there are still differences of opinion, but I think we can do more to support religious schools even as the broader debates continue. So that's what I would say.
Do you want to say something?
Authorization of the major legislations that carry forward our education policy, and I do want to go on record here as saying that there has been no contemporary American president more reform-minded and more aggressive about reforming America's broken public schools than Barack Obama.
Thank you.
He's been extraordinary in this. Absolutely extraordinary. If you will allow me to add that there's room for much deeper partnership with America's faith-based schools. I won't go into the recent closing of the Opportunity Scholarship Program in Washington, D.C., which from our perspective, and I speak here for the American Catholic Church, was inconscionable. Delighted to hear all of us talk more about families, parents, choice, competition, and the appropriate role that parents ought to have as their God-given right to be able to choose the school of their choice for their child, regardless of whether they can afford the real estate tax structure of Winnetka, Illinois.
Bueno, respecto a la segunda pregunta, porque la primera respecto a las razones históricas del gobierno americano, pues no soy la más adecuada para responder, pero yo al menos tengo claro cuál es la tarea del Estado en educación. Tanto la Declaración Universal de los Derechos Humanos como la propia Constitución española reconocen el derecho a la libertad religiosa e insisten en que los padres tienen derecho a decidir y dirigir la educación de los hijos. Por lo tanto, la complementariedad que ejercen las instituciones en la educación de los hijos es una colaboración en la misión educativa de los padres y, por tanto, las personas en las instituciones actúan en nombre de ellos, o si me permiten, por encargo de ellos. Por eso avisaba del argumento a veces utilizado de sustraer el derecho a los padres, este derecho de los padres con el fin de dar a todos los niños las mismas oportunidades en el marco de una escuela única. Es un señuelo, que pretende suplantar a la familia privándole de su responsabilidad educativa.
The example of taking away responsibilities from families.
L'educazione è
Now, going back to this question has always been used as a tool, an instrument of change in society, not only in communist countries as an ideological tool to change society, but also in America the racial issues have been tackled thanks to with an educational approach. Now, this has been very effective, but has implied many problems nevertheless, and also raises a question that Lucía made reference to. Is education the instrument to change society? What is the task of education in society? Is it to create or to mold citizens, and then who has to establish the content, what should be taught, what should not be taught, and also the freedom of choice of parents. Is it an absolute right, or is there a role or place for the state and government?
The United States is not unique in that the system of education that a country chooses ends up being the most powerful reinforcer of either equality or inequality that that country experiences. And in our country, education is the single most powerful reinforcer of segregation and inequality in our society. And that's not an overstatement. Because of the way we have chosen to finance our schools, minority children who are disadvantaged cannot afford to go to functional schools. Now, that's just not right. And so we have to change that. Faith-based schools isn't the answer for the reform of America's school system, but it's part of the answer. And school choice isn't the answer, but it's part of the answer. And so I just get a little bit frustrated because I so agree with our president profoundly that we need all hands on deck. That's what he said. And if we need all hands on deck, then all hands have to be welcome on deck. And we have to have the resources to be able to carry out our God-given mission to educate these children. There's an advantage that's an empirically demonstrable advantage for faith-based schools as it relates to the education of minorities and immigrant children, period. This has been demonstrated from James Coleman's work in the 1960s throughout today, with Anthony Brike's most recent work, Catholic Schools and the Common Good, the president of the Carnegie Endowment for the Advancement of Teaching. So anyway, I so am encouraged by the reauthorization of our major education legislation that there will be consideration given to the needs of faith-based schools.
I would concur with many of those sentiments, and we have seen over the course of our country's history that on the one hand there's no greater reinforcer of segregation and difference than an unequal school system. And on the other hand, no greater leveler, equalizer as well. I've certainly seen this in the American South as that school system shifted, and then getting into the busing crisis of the 1970s. Among the most important fractures, fissures in American public life were around schools. And that's because it's so important. It's so important to have an equal education. You know, I can't say that resolving the public-private challenge is an easy thing to do. But I will say this president is committed to having that conversation. A little-known fact is that he, for a brief time, was a product of Catholic schools himself.
I'm very aware of that.
In fact, he went to a Catholic school in Indonesia for a time. And was a great supporter of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And so it's a conversation we want to have while at the same time ensuring the strong support and growth of our public school system. So I look forward to that dialogue. Thank you.
Grazie. Un avviso.
So may I now remind you all that today at 5 o'clock in the B7 room, a very significant meeting with the participation of Cardinal Peter Erdo, the President of the Episcopal Conferences of Europe, Archbishop of Bucharest, Primate of Hungary, and the Metropolitan of Minsk, Mr. Filaret. The moderator will be Mr. Fontolan, Director of the International Center of Communion and Liberation. Thank you.